now listening to Vigilantes Radio, presented by the Only One Media Group. This is the people's choice for quality interviews, celebrities, and special guests. Hosted by Demetrius Dinny Reynolds. Call in to join the mix at 701-801-9813. For the complete archive of episodes, visit onlyonemediagroup.com and be sure to like us on Facebook at Vigilantes Radio. We welcome all. Enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Demetrius Houdini Black Reynolds. Enjoy the show.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. And what is going on, guys? Welcome to another incredible episode of Vigilantes Radio Live right here on iHeartRadio. And I am your host, Deanie. This particular episode is pre-recorded, and I can't wait to deliver it to your inboxes. And for you guys to subscribe to the show, you'll be the first to know, and I always appreciate that. Before I introduce my guest, I just want to say this is the frequency of the fearless. You know, leadership isn't just about the titles, the corner offices, or the strategies scribbled on a whiteboard. It's about life. It's about energy. It's about the pulse that runs through every conversation, decision, and action. When we stop managing like machines and start leading like living systems, everything changes. Today we're diving deep with two voices who live and breathe this truth, giving leaders a framework to heal, grow, and thrive in disruption. You're not just here for a talk show, and this isn't just radio. This is revival for your mind, body, and spirit. This is Vigilantes Radio Live. My name is Coach Deanie, and change is possible. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Well, let's go. All right. Again, welcome to the show. You're listening to VRL. That's Vigilantes Radio Live right here on iHeartRadio. And I am your host, Deanie. Our interviews are designed to go beyond the music, news, books, art, acting, films, technology, education, entrepreneurship, entertainment, spirituality, and sometimes even past that thing that we call the ego. Our interviews are designed to go behind the scenes and into the minds of these brilliant human beings. You know, the ones who are out there giving it their all for me, for you, and for the world. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our guests today are redefining leadership for the modern age. Christopher Eaddy, licensed NLP trainer, author of The Biology of Business and Behavior Strategies, has worked alongside icons like Tony Robbins and Stephen Covey to help leaders thrive from the inside out. Lisa Oborne, executive coach, indigenous wisdom carrier, and corporate strategist, brings decades of experience bridging high-pressure performance with human-centered leadership. Together, they equip leaders to lead like living systems, not machines. So please join me in saying, welcome, friend, to Christopher Eaddy and Lisa Oborne. Good morning, good morning.
Thanks. Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. How are you guys doing this morning?
Absolutely super. Feeling great, glad to be alive, and glad to be able to think about the things that I think are really important for people.
Absolutely. Which is?
Every living thing, including organisms and organizations, because they come from the same root word, is either growing or it's dying. Humans, businesses, animals, trees, plants, if it's not growing, it's dying. I think that's the most important thing for human beings, because once we start that process of atrophy in the brain, et cetera, no more plasticity, we're on the road to dying. It's going to happen naturally anyway. But there isn't a reason why we should be sitting still, doing nothing, not thinking, not allowing our brains not just to continue to develop, but continue to develop around the things that are important. This last time I checked, work and organizations are important.
That is right. That is right. And what you water will grow, and what you don't water will die.
Yeah, we want people to understand their own need for growth, because most of us, we do life as opposed to live it. And when you're doing something, you're very conscious about what you're doing. And oftentimes, you really don't think about, when you're in your car, you don't think about the car. You think about the road, you think about other people. Sometimes you daydream and you go way out of the car. But you're not thinking about the car itself, thinking, oh, this is my car with 4 wheels on it. I got a steering wheel here. Now, if I hold this steering wheel kind of in the center, I can stay in the middle of this lane. That's the way growth is for most human beings. Yes, we go to school. We're taught to learn. For most adults, however, and you got to think about this, growth in organizations is mirrored in the same way that growth for humans is mirrored. Organizations are comprised of living organisms. So the idea for us is that we want people to understand their growth, which starts in the central nervous system.
Indeed. Lisa, are you there?
I am here. I was waiting for Chris to finish. I did not want to interrupt. It's always great stuff that he shares. And I think it's so important because we forget that, especially when we're talking about the central nervous system. Because, let's be honest, that looks after everything, right? And we forget it so often. And so often we don't realize that, 95% of our system, once we hit age 35, is on autopilot. Mm. And how do you grow if you leave everything to be on autopilot? How do you learn? How do you change? How do you do things different if you just continue to let it do the exact same thing in every situation, the exact same way? Even look at when you get up in the morning, what do? You usually get up at the same time. You have your coffee, breakfast the same way, your shower, you go to work, you drive the same route. You see the same cars, you see the same people. How often do we look for something different and do change?
Mm-hmm. Are we on autopilot because things become repetitive?
We're on autopilot because it's familiar and it's comfortable. And a lot of people say they want change, they like change, but where do we spend most of our life? Not in change. And that's become so difficult for so many because we're comfortable being comfortable, even though we claim we're comfortable being uncomfortable, and we're not.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into the frameworks and strategies, I would love to know what's been on your heart and minds lately, as you see progress happening or not happening.
I think one of the things that happens in particularly our discussions, because we want to be relevant and we want to make sure that we're targeting the right root causes, is looking at the general world of commerce. And we see, obviously tariffs are impacting things. And even before then, where the people were anticipating it, whether it was financial writing on the wall, when we began to see mass layoffs and the resistance to return to office, we started looking at, okay, what is this doing to people? And obviously one of the things that drives a lot of the behaviors of business is fear. And that's not to say that we as an organ don't have fear, or an organism, of course we do. It's managing that fear. Just because the company says, hey, we're going to be laying off 1,000 workers, it doesn't mean that it has to be you. There are things that you can do to rise above norm or the normal to become a superstar. And it starts, again, with that calibrating of the central nervous system. But for us, at least my observation in our conversation, is just really paying attention to what's going on in the world of work and the hurt and the pain that people are feeling. And that's what's on my heart and mind, is to help them move past that, because in some situations they didn't create it.
And I think that's a good point there, Chris, because even when you brought up again, and I think about it a lot, being the return to office. And if you think about it, and just what we talked about, Deanie, saying, why do we go on autopilot and not change? If you think about it, for that 4 or 5 years, what you saw in the media was, oh my, working remote, working from home, however they wanted to phrase it, it's great. We were so much more productive. Things were going wonderful. We had better profit. All of a sudden now, many companies want people back in the office because what happens? You want to go back to what's familiar. And so many organizations are going back to what's familiar while at the same time saying, want innovation and change. What are we really doing? What's really happening in society? And it's something to think about. Is it really wanting change, or is it that discomfort level of doing something that's familiar?
Christopher, when you first started developing the biology of business, was there a single aha moment that made you see business as a living system? And if so, what was it?
At the time I began writing that book, I was going through a number of careers. I'd worked in healthcare. I was in nursing school at the time, and so obviously cells and living things was kind of forefront and center. And I was growing tomatoes, had a house in Southeast USA, this super environment for growing things. And I decided I'm going to plant a garden. So I planted this garden, which didn't work out too well because I did it with no guidance and I just blind enthusiasm. And when it got to what I settled on, which was tomatoes, I would pull them in when they turned red. And it was kind of neat just noticing nothing. Then there was this bud and there was this little round ball and it grew and it grew. One week I decided I'll get that one in the back. I just don't feel like reaching back there to grab it. So I grabbed some. I already had some in the house. I took it in the house. And about a week and a half later, I came back to the tomato plant. And as I was pulling off newly ripened tomatoes, I noticed that the one that I hadn't picked off earlier was actually dying. And it occurred to me, man, that thing looks so good. I was going to savor it. And in thinking that I was going to savor it, I was actually causing it to die because at the point when it ripened, it was no longer growing. And my mind was flooded with all these companies that had closed: Compaq, USA, Parmalat, Pan Am Airlines, Eastern, Kodak. I mean, I can go on, and you can think of a ton of businesses that have closed. And it made me think, what happened to them? And I guess to just really sum it up, they stopped growing. When Sears catalog kept being produced and being sent to people, and you either had to come to the store or do it through the catalog, when online services began, that's not something they adjusted to. To Lisa's word, they didn't change. And the idea of what's called senescence in biology, which is old age, if companies don't innovate and they stay in the comfort zone, Blockbuster Video. We went from DVDs to streaming. They didn't make the adjustment. Now, they were probably the grandfather in video and DVD production and dissemination, but they failed to grow. When streaming became popular, it put them out of business. Another way of saying it, they died because they weren't growing. That was my aha moment. It came from a tomato, but somehow or another, it just flooded my mind with the careers that I had had in government and in education. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that connection would just somehow flood my mind and be as clear as it was.
Yeah. And Lisa, how did you know this approach was the missing piece in your own leadership work?
For me, it was very important because it was in a way that was finally put into words, is probably the best way to put it. So often you see it and you realize it. And looking at companies and a lot of what Chris just said, right? companies get on the bandwagon or on some specific new thing, which of course they're considering new to be AI. And I'm saying that for a particular reason, because many of us that have been in technology realized AI started with IBM's Watson. That was more than a decade ago. But what happens in a lot of cases, organizations wait until there's that comfort, like what Chris said, and now they're being innovative, but you're being innovative with something which has already been around for quite a while. So it's looking at that and being willing to get out of that comfort zone, to try something completely new, instead of going with something now that's familiar, that your consumer has already agreed to and gone, oh, this is a great idea. So how do we get innovative? And this is the big scenario. Try something new, being willing to take that risk. And this is a lot of what Chris mentioned even in the book, right? And that example of what I'm saying with AI, that relates to the tomato. What happens? You wait. You're no longer first to market. You're no longer the company that's starting that off. You've waited until that tomato's gotten really ripe, and now it's no longer that particular vision, because now, like all the other tomatoes, are all ripe and people are just picking which one they like. And it makes a huge difference. And to me, this is why I really like that book, like the concept, because when we think about it, even as humans, right, it does correlate to our central nervous system. And even if you have people talking about being ill or sick or having disease, and they say, oh, but part of it is my central nervous system doesn't work, or I have problems with this. And if you look at how many nerves there are in the body, everything is not constantly working, right? There's times that things are slow. There's times that things are running full tilt. It's not that constant pattern all the time, just like innovation, right? There's times when we're more innovative. There's times when we need to look at it, enhance it, take it to that next level, maybe just scale. But we need to be aware of it and being willing to look at it from different views and opportunities.
Indeed. The Q framework helps leaders calibrate communication. Let's talk about the Q framework for a second. How did you guys develop this framework, and how do you execute it?
Well, in simple, I come from a psychology background. Lisa comes from a more organic leadership, where she's gone through those roles, had the experience, and we're equal that way, but she brings a very indigenous spiritual impact to how we think about the ideas of vibration. In my background, partly gone to school to become an engineer. We talk about frequency and waves and cosines and sine waves, etc. We all exist in that realm. Vibration. Every living thing has a frequency. And when we talk about either managing electricity, managing sound, managing frequency, one of the words that's used to change it is calibrate it. You're calibrating it or tuning it to a particular level. For instance, a tuning fork, which most of us are familiar with from high school or middle school or elementary school, is kind of like the triangle, but it's a little fork. And sometimes we see the teacher ding in and you see it vibrate. Interestingly, police departments use that to calibrate their radars before they give people tickets, because it has to be at a particular frequency. And so they hit the little tuning fork and it shows up on the radar device at what frequency it's operating. From a neuro-linguistic problem-solving model, calibrating is about understanding the internal systems and then neurologically using our language, our imagery, our sounds to recalibrate those personal frequencies. And the place where the frequencies happen, because again, we're talking about electrical impulses, is in the central nervous system. So first, in order to be able to communicate, collaborate, the central nervous system has to be calibrated, and that's how we get to really good conversation. is when you can blend and flow with anybody's conversation. And that's not to say it's a personality trait, because sometimes our personality is great. You know, people say, oh man, what a good dude. She's a great gal. But we don't see them all the time. And sometimes their personality allows them to push through and flow with people. And then they're a monster at home, or they're a monster somewhere else. When they're calibrated, they get to control their emotional states more often than reacting. And if you think about it, if you can control your emotional state through your central nervous system to be calm when there are things that should create excitement, one of the things you get to do is you get to become just an absolute better communicator almost instantly. Now, the Q framework itself is based upon calibrating the CNS. The U is understanding the signals. You're getting stimuli right now. There's stimuli around you, whether it's air blowing, particles touching your skin, noises from cars going by, loud sounds outside. It's not just that you're getting stimuli, but if you leave your house, listen to the radio on your computer, you're being bombarded with over 30,000 messages a day from marketing and advertising. So there's a lot of stimuli coming in. People stimuli, work stimuli, task stimuli. And those are the things that you have to think about constantly. That puts a lot of people in burnout. When we begin to interpret the signals right, Christopher, I need you to do this right away. Okay. Now, I can react and go, who the heck do you think you're talking to? Or I can consider, you know what? I don't know what's going through his head yet. I can't think through his head because I don't have that clarity. So I'm going to give him a pass, and then we're going to have a conversation. Hey, look, you know, it's kind of rough when you say, hey, Christopher, I need this right now, or I need this in 5 minutes. Even though I can produce it, it feels pejorative. I don't like being talked to like that. If I could understand what you're thinking in your head, it would make it so much easier to be responsive, because then I would understand, yeah, this fits this piece of puzzle, and that puzzle is in a circle. It's moving around. I have to do it now, or when it passes me, I won't be able to put my little piece in there. And then we want people to understand leadership. We want them to understand leadership. Look, there's a lot of good leadership models. I mean, the most popular is probably John Maxwell, which I think is great. Been following him for decades now. I don't think that's the only one that's great. You can go to a lot of the spiritual texts and find great leadership models, whether that's the Tao Te Ching from the Middle East, the Bible. It doesn't matter. There are great models out there. So we want people to define leadership for them. Who's the leader you want to follow? That's the leader you want to become. And then we help them embody that. And it's not just embodying these characteristics, it's an identity. Because identity is the strongest force in the human psyche. It is what causes policemen, firemen, because of their identity, to run in buildings while everybody else is running out. Because it's the strongest force in the psyche, we want people to understand their identity as a leader. We want them to answer the question, what is your leadership identity? When they answer that question, we teach them how to embody it. The E is kind of a 3. We want them to embody it. We want them to enjoy it. And then we want them to exemplify what it means to be a great leader so that they can duplicate themselves. That's the basis of the Q framework. Sorry for my enthusiasm.
All right. So many managers feel like they're doing everything right, but still feel stuck. If you had to diagnose that feeling like a doctor with a patient, what's the first question you ask and why?
Lisa?
And that's a great question. And I think really looking at it is when you look at various things, right, you become that particular job or you become that particular role. And people feel stuck because we're going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. doing the same thing, not trying anything different, not understanding how we react to different situations. So we feel stuck because what are we doing? Exactly the same thing as we did yesterday or a week ago or 6 months ago or a year ago with the same situation. But what we forget is, just like what you asked a little bit earlier, what's happening in the media, the different events that are happening all around of us have changed. But we haven't changed the way that we've approached it. We're trying to approach it the same way in a completely different situation and wondering why nothing's working, as well as evaluating why didn't it work before, doing what we need to do to change. But that takes a very great question. You have to ask yourself, what do you need to do differently? And being willing to ask yourself, what do you need to do differently? And I'll give sort of an example of that. So if you find you're stuck, are there places where you're not stuck? So I had this conversation with a client a few weeks ago. They said they were stuck, they couldn't get out of it. And I said, when do you not feel stuck? And I said, I don't care if it's work, if it's personal life, whatever it is. Because I don't feel stuck when I play my guitar. And then we start having a conversation as to why. Took him to a completely different place. And that's what mattered, being willing to go somewhere where innovative, where calm, where new ideas come up. Had to change the location, had to change the environment, had to change the stimuli and what really made him tick. And that all goes back to the nervous system. What allows you to be calm, innovative, excited, what brings out you as opposed to just the same situation on repeat.
I love that. Burnout seems to be the silent epidemic of leadership. When you meet someone who's clearly running on empty, what's your first intervention, and how do you help them believe recovery is possible?
I think for us, it starts with listening. When people engage with us, it's typically because they're at some point of burnout or recognizing symptoms that they don't like. And their communication with us is not because they're weak, it's because they recognize that what they've been doing, that urgency, that drive, that push to be a good leader, didn't really give them the freedom. It gave them more of a functional freeze. And so by the time we talk with most of the executives, whether they be the surgeons, the former professional athletes, tech leaders, the people that we typically hear from, we start with that question that Lisa's talking about. It starts with listening. And the question that we're asking to get them to open up is, how are you feeling about your life in general? And then we use it like a cone and we just get real specific. What do you think the driver is that's pushing you into overwork? We had a surgeon that we worked with. I mean, she's world class. I'd let her take little pieces of my brain out. She's that good. I mean, I would willingly do it because I trust her that much. She's that good. And she just couldn't stop being a surgeon. I mean, she was telling Lisa all the time, Lisa, I'm at the beach and I'm checking my phone and I've got my little tablet and I'm looking, you know. She wasn't reading for pleasure. She was reading to fix work things. And so one of the things that we did with her is we got her to start recoding using imagery in her language. And this is where the neurolinguistic problem solving came in. And I had her say, you know what? At the moment, I do not have a scalpel in my hand. I am a human, and I'm allowed to be human, and I get to live. And the more she said that, the more her free time, her available non-working role time, really became more precious and safe away from the role that she was working in. And so one of the things we want to know is we want to know, what do you think the driver is? Because in some cases, you know, we had one guy a client that never spoke up. I mean, this guy, pretty high level leader. He just never would offer his ideas as a VP in bigger meetings. And then later we'd find out, gosh, yeah, that was a great idea. Well, when we really did this, we did a neurolinguistic language trace pattern with him. And what we came up with, he just plainly said it, as we walked backwards through that induction, is that he saw himself as 7 years old, sitting in the back of the classroom. He didn't really understand the subject on a particular day, didn't raise his hand, although he wanted to ask a question. The next day, as the teacher was doing more advanced work in that particular topic, he sat in the back of the room, absolutely confused, didn't raise his hand. And he just adopted and adapted to that pattern his whole life. That's what became comfortable. And even though the guy is as smart and as sharp as a tack point, that little 7-year-old identity that he decided to adopt became the driver for his current behavior, what was future behavior then, the current behavior.
And I think, Chris, I'm going to add a little bit to that, because even when we started out with this question, sort of saying, you're running on empty. And I'm going to go into a little bit of an example. So what happens when we run on empty to our car? We take it to the gas station, we take it for a tune-up, we change the oil, maybe the air filter, maybe we have to do the carburetor, maybe there's spark plugs that need to be fixed, or the brakes. We look after it and we fix the car so it runs optimum. How often do you do that to yourself as a human? Most people don't. Most people don't do a tune-up. They just continue to work the same way, do the same thing. As Chris mentioned, the same identity, that's my role. We don't go do a tune-up, we don't change, we do the same thing. And if you look outside in nature, what happens? There's times that tomatoes produce tomatoes. There's times that the plants don't. They stop producing, they slow down, they die, they're planted again in a fresh season to start again. They revamp themselves, they redo, they restart. There's times for harvest, there's times for things to be planted, there's times for things to slow down. As humans, many people and many organizations, we run the exact same way in those organizations 365 days of the year. A lot of it isn't change, and that's a big factor. And what makes that difference is, why are you burned out? Why are you running on empty? We forget about those different cycles. We forget to replenish ourselves. It just ends up being exactly the same constantly, just like somebody that talks in a conversation on monotone. Exactly the same, no change, no deviation.
I love that. And you're both advocates for people first leadership. How do you balance that with the reality that some businesses still has to hit numbers and is still focused on productivity versus people investment?
I think instead of human resources, because a human being is not necessarily a resource unless you're communicating and somehow engaging them at a CNS or brain level. Human resource should be called capital, human capital, because that's really what it is to a company. And I think the issue with how companies function is more mechanistic. And if you think about for just a second, what do human beings create? We find something that works and then we create models off of it. The most successful model we have as human beings is ourself. And if Lisa could make a comparison in human biology to a vehicle which we've created, how close then are our businesses to that of a human organism in terms of the way it's designed? It is absolutely designed that way. You have a higher functioning system in your head called your brain, and it has executive functions that different pieces of the glands, et cetera, in your brain are responsible for. Does that sound just like a CEO and the executive level of a company. And then you have a screening system. And that screening system brings in good employees and keeps out bad employees. That to me sounds like the liver and the kidneys. That's what they do in the human body. Communication, the lungs. Every single cell with every breath gets oxygen. The one that doesn't, to Lisa's point, for whatever reason, not always working right, it tends to lag and eventually it'll die if it doesn't get that oxygen. The heart. People talk about knowing the pulse of the culture, and we do these pulse surveys. Well, that's the most important element in the entire system other than the stomach. Because if your stomach's not good, you can forget your brain, forget your legs, your arms, your stomach's going to take over. But the heart is the pulse of a company. It's the culture. So getting people to understand that the organization is not this boxed, canned, operational system that will function on its own, and it's unlike a human organism. It won't fix itself because these are individual cells. And think about this. It's very, very rare that a great leader can get everybody to wholeheartedly, hook, line, and sinker follow them. So you have divergent cells. Some they're just enthusiastic, they want to be great for the company, and others, it's the comfort of a check. So they're not necessarily vested. So you have cells that just, they're not completely in the ecosystem where it's like, hey, synchronicity. Some are doing their own things. Some are vying for positions of power. Some are trying to get out and go somewhere else. Unlike the cells of your body, they don't want to get out. They want to stay there and keep things at a stable level, even if you experience variety. And so companies at some level have got to begin realizing we went through this humanization movement in technology because in the last 10 years, being more agile, which is about being first to market, being faster to market, et cetera, and being more proficient and efficient, the whole idea behind that became, hold on, it's not about our processes, it's about the people. Not everybody got that memo. A lot of manufacturers did, because I've worked at some. I've worked for defense contractors. I've worked for the largest roofing company in North America. So I know some big ones got it. Lisa and I worked at the number 3 largest tech company in the world. So we know that people have gotten that message. Did it translate? Did they transform? Did they change? Some, I would say, altered their course a little bit. Most didn't change, which is evidenced by, hey, get back in here in the office. We need your butts in the seat. Really? We thought you were more productive when people could actually take care of their kids and their loved ones and be around their family and have the flexibility. If they couldn't do it an hour during the day, they could do it an hour at 9 o'clock at night. That's what we have to do with companies and executives and leaders, is get them to understand at the heart of their business, it's people. And if we mess up the people element, I can almost assure you the innovation required to move past aging out and not being relevant will kill the business.
You like to add to that, Lisa?
Add a little bit to it. And when we go back to exactly what you started with saying, human resources. What's a resource? A resource is my laptop. I was given a resource to do my work. I was given a mobile device. I was shown the processes. Those are resources, right? Humans were beings, right? We're meant to think, to innovate, to have time to take that information and process it, right? But a lot of cases in organizations, we've become human doings. We're just doing what we're told. We're doing what's expected. We're doing what matches the company's overall vision. But if innovation's wanted, it has to go back to that human being to allow us time to think, to process, to come up with new ways of doing things. And if you put yourself in that position, and everybody's slightly different, a lot of us, when we can think and be innovative, are different. So as Chris just mentioned, get back to the office. Some people are great in that environment, and they can come up with wonderful ideas with all of that noise and chaos and hearing the other conversations going on. It makes things click and information flows. Other people, you put them outside, you put them near the water, somewhere serene where they can slow down, information flows. Other people, maybe it's that wonderful, you wake up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and you just have to write it down because it won't stop, or we hear people saying in the shower. And it's important to realize that. So when you talk about human resources, we really have to look instead at the human being and what allows them to just excel in what they're doing. And that isn't one size fits all. And it's important to take that into consideration, because if people are not able to become innovative, to take that to the next level, as was mentioned at the very beginning by Chris, organizations live or they die. And if your people are stuck into one size fits all, you're only as good as your weakest link.
Yeah. For someone listening today who feels stuck or unseen, what's one message you want echoing in their mind after this conversation?
I think for me is to have them understand if there's a place that they can see themselves getting to. There exists a place where there's reduced stress and improved mental clarity, especially as a leader, because those are things that we have to take to work every time we enter that environment. The ability to create teams that self-correct or that take ownership. And again, I think it's when there's a problem, if there's transparency. Now granted, the brain doesn't say to every single cell and organ, hey, look, our A1C is 6 point whatever, but the systems that need to know that information know it, and whoever's in charge of that system also knows somewhat about the other system, because if they have to take up that slack, it's like when the right side of your body hurts and the left side compensates, you don't have to tell it to. So that's the system taking ownership for, hey, look, I'm part of the issue. I'm gonna try and do my part to correct this. A lot of leaders are dealing with issues around keeping good people, especially where people are balking against the idea of returning to office. There's a place as a leader where you don't have to worry about retention or culture scores on these pulse surveys. A lot of instances, people's jobs are depending on how well their people fill out pulse surveys. And so the encouragement is, hey, I need you to fill this out a certain way. Well, that's not honesty and transparency. A cell wouldn't lie. It just knows its job, and that's what it's supposed to do. We want leaders to be confident when they're leading change, even when they're uncertain. And I think those particular things are achievable, they're available, and no matter what you're going through, one of the things that Lisa will be doing in the near future is meditation, because I remember some of the stress that I experienced at a previous company, and one of the benefits is that some of the quote-unquote cells inside said, hey, we all realize this is stressful. And so the company let us, on company time, do Zoom calls in the afternoon where we spent 30 minutes just clearing our heads and relaxing, which was great. What a good way to go home, as opposed to, you're in this environment and maybe you're that person that Lisa talked about. You can handle massive amounts of stress and all the balls flying up in the air, but it's nice to be able to put that away when you go and you have 3 kids at home, and that person that goes home with those 3 kids shouldn't see that process of how they do dad or mom like they do work. It's a different culture. I want people to know that there is a place where you can get to, where you can stop leading from stress and start leading with adaptive intelligence.
All right. Where can our listeners connect with you guys on the internet and find out more information?
Well, you can find us at Cues for Leadership on LinkedIn. You can find us at Cues for Leadership, our website. And when people are ready for a conversation, we take them straight to the Academy, which is cuesforleadershipacademy.com, where we can engage and they don't have to go through, hey, who are these guys? What do they do? Oh, that's really neat. They got this thing called the biological audit framework, like you fill out a form when you go to the doctor. One of the things, and I want to mention this thing because it's really important. When leaders are going through the uncertainty of the performance review cycles, we call it, where you want to get to a certain level, but your performance review based upon your team just isn't getting there. It's good, company wants to keep you, job is safe, but you just can't push through that level of why won't they see the talent that I'm bringing? Like, why can't they see the potential? We take them through what is called a career calibration, and what it does is it, by way of 30 years of research, 15 different countries, 30,000 people, 40 years, this guy dedicated his life to understanding what are the natural complexity of business roles. Oh, guess what? Certain human beings can actually manage more complexity than others. Like, for instance, I know one of the things that he did was he ran, just as a reference, our listeners can understand it's not just some irrelevant person that he did this testing on. He did it on Colin Powell, who was the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He actually did a lot with the United States Army. Dr. Jax was actually a Canadian-born MD, but also a psychologist and a therapist. But what he did with Colin Powell was he looked at the trajectory and could predict at the age of 19 exactly where Colin Powell was going to end up with 96% accuracy. Colin Powell looked at it and said, wow, you just mapped out my whole career and you don't even know me. That's how good it is. But we want managers to understand, hey, here's where you are. And if this role is not honoring your ability to deal with certain levels of complexity in work, then maybe this is the time to consider taking on a role somewhere else. Or, you know what, they're talking about moving you to this particular level. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's what I've been dying for that. I'm bored out of my gourd with this job. I feel like I could do it in my sleep. So those are some of the tools that we bring to the table. We want leaders to know you're not stuck. It feels stuck, and there are resources. What we do is help them understand they've got most of the resources already. We just expose them to it.
Lisa, before we go, your career spans shop floors to C-suite or C-suite. What's one leadership myth you had to unlearn yourself, and how did that change your approach?
That's a great question. And for me, it was the biggest thing of trying to be everything for everyone, which is what I had to unlearn. I thought I had to be that resource, have all of the answers, which I know I didn't have. And the piece that really moved me forward was being willing to say that out loud and having no concern at all about what that meant, how it would impact things. One of the roles I had when I was a leader, I became a leader of the team because their prior manager passed away on the weekend. And I got put into a team right away for that reason. And that really made a big shift because it brought in true empathy. It had me listen to where they were, what was concerning, allowing them to be productive as a group without any specific expectations, but allowing them to grow, work at their own pace. And what we accomplished was truly amazing because we sat, we shared. There were times that we hugged and cried, and yes, I know that's in an office, but that's what the team was going through. And you have to be willing to go where the team is as opposed to expecting them to do what you think is right.
All right. I love that. Today we unpack the heartbeat of modern leadership with Christopher Eaddy and Lisa Oborne, exploring why managers feel stuck, how burnout can be reversed, the power of diagnosing communication breakdowns, and why your business should be treated like a living system. Christopher and Lisa didn't just give us theory, they gave us tools, stories, and a new way to think about leading in times of change. And if you want more of their insight, head to cuesforleadership.com and grab a copy of The Biology of Business on Amazon. I will include the links in the description of this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to Vigilantes Radio Live, leave a rating, share this episode with someone who needs it, and fuel the mission over at buymeacoffee.com/Vigilantes Radio. Until next time, lead boldly, live fully, and keep the conversation alive. Thank you so much, Christopher and Lisa. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Here.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Peace to all. My name is Deanie, and I am the host of Vigilantes Radio Live. I think that we are beyond just asking cool questions and getting cool responses. I think that we are here as creatives to provide an example that you can do things different outside of expectations, because some of us simply were not born into the club, but there is perhaps a door, window, or back gate that we can leave a clue for you to get into. Life is short, but there are plenty of moments to try and get it right. Pursuing your dreams and learning from mistakes may be tough, but regret is tougher. To book your interview, email us at vradio@onlyonemediagroup.com. That's a V as in victorious. Or visit onlyonemediagroup.com. I'm counting on you. Heaven, we all are counting on you to step into your purpose and your passion. You are listening to Vigilantes Radio Live on iHeartRadio, providing you with an opportunity to dive deeper.
You are now listening to Vigilantes Radio, the people's choice for quality interviews, art, music, and hot topics. Hosted by Demetrius Houdini Black Reynolds. All episodes of this podcast are available for free download at www.onlyonemediagroup.com.